you can either get thrown around by those events and you bob around like a cork, or you can shape them. What you have as an MP, you're really plugged into your constituency, right? So you know hundreds, thousands of people. The British state works because people have each other's mobile phone numbers. So you get very good at distilling down what's the absolutely essence of my message. As the MP, you're the most connected person. Every day you wake up and think, what's going to happen today? And I just don't think you get that so much.
Today I'm delighted to welcome Mike Martin MP from Tunbridge Wells. Before entering Parliament as a Lib Dem MP, Mike had a distinguished military career, including multiple deployments to Helmand. He's also a respected author and a leading figure in geopolitics and a senior fellow at King's College London. He's also a very old friend of mine. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Nick.
Mike, we've travelled across Africa, the Congo, Uganda. We've done South America together in our early 20s, famously like trekking up to Machu Picchu. How did those early adventures, shape how you see risk, leadership, and the world today?
God, I mean, that's a huge question. I think I've always wanted to do that stuff, right? When I was a little kid, so we met when we were 12, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading kind of books of people going on expeditions at that point, right? Like, Beaugest or Wilfred Thesiger and stuff. And I just read these books and I just thought, oh my God, there is this amazing world out there that I want to go and explore. And that was the first thing, and to kind of be curious and go out there and explore stuff. And then we went on all these adventures, and we went to Congo, didn't we, in 2003, and then that later turned into this massive journey. Not on that trip, but I went back with someone else who then we bought a Land Rover and drove it across the Congo for 2 months.
Yeah, first ever person to do that.
Yeah, right. Or in a very long time, certainly since the kind of middle of the last century. And I guess it was initially it was curiosity that drove me to do that. But actually then when you get into those environments, you mentioned my military career, actually you realise in those types of environments that you're living on your wits. We're shooting this in London, right? We've had really privileged upbringings, and life's actually kind of easy if you're like us, right? You need to work hard and so on and so forth, but if you fail, there's a safety net usually for people like you and me, and that I find that quite bland. And I like the taste of life where you are, being in Parliament, that's real life, right?
Yeah.
Or being in the military, that's real life, because you are, you're having to day react and interact with hundreds of people and with rapidly changing situations. And I think you see that as well when you go on these expeditions, whether it's driving a Land Rover across the Congo, walking the length of the West Bank, or my wife and I, well, now wife, but we met sailing and then bought a sailboat and sailed around the world together. So all of those, you kind of learn so much about yourself doing those things, and you just every day you wake up and think, what's going to happen today? And I just don't think you get that so much in the kind of very privileged lives that we've led. So I'm kind of doubly lucky, not just to have that privileged life, but also be able to go and do those great things.
Yeah, absolutely. Some amazing things. And did you ever imagine you'd end up in Parliament?
I mean, it's really hard, isn't it? Because you sort of retrofit, looking back, you always kind of rearrange your own past, don't you?
Yeah.
So that so that the current makes sense. So I get, being really honest, I think my dad tried to run for Parliament. For the Tories, in fact, in 1983, and my whole family were Tories, but the kind of pro-European liberal Tories, like right at the centre of the Tory party, the sort of Ken Clarke Tories that don't exist anymore because the Tory party's disappeared off into another bit of the political space. And so I think in our family we're always discussing politics. I think do you remember when you came over to my house and we watched an election?
Yeah,
with Alec?
absolutely. Yeah.
We stayed up all night and watched, when we were teenagers. And I think probably you could see then, and my dad was up watching it downstairs, and we're all interested in politics in my family.
Yeah, your dad knew every constituency, every MP.
Yeah.
We were just baffled by
that. Nuneaton pops up and he goes, "Oh my God, that's gone Labour." That's it. So I think that was always kind of the environment that I grew up in, and going, I spent 2 years in southern Afghanistan, and that's a real, as I said, you're living on your wits. It's exhilarating. It's all of the emotions, but in bright lights. Terrifying, exhilarating, exciting, interesting. And I find politics a bit like that as well, because particularly today with the media and the news cycle and social media, it spins so fast that, and I'll give you a great example, right? At the moment in my constituency, we have a water crisis. The water company is appalling. We have been without water for a few days. We had another outage in December.
Yeah.
So yesterday, on Monday, I was in Parliament questioning ministers about this. On Tuesday, I took the decision, because the crisis was getting worse, to go back to the constituency. And so I was on the ground in water bottle stations trying to coordinate what was going on there. Then I came back to Westminster, because today I was going to try and get into Prime Minister's questions to press the Prime Minister on it. 11 o'clock last night, I find out that the Secretary of State is going to be visiting my constituency. So all of a sudden, I'm then spinning up a visit for the Secretary of State to visit. So after this podcast, I'm going to get back on a train, go back to the constituency, do that visit. So you can just see you're on this continual train of events, and you can either get thrown around by those events and you bob around like a cork, or you can shape them. And I think you have to have huge energy and focus to be able to shape those events as they're happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, it's lucky that Tunbridge Wells is only an hour on the train, and you're not in St Andrews or or the sort of deepest, darkest Wales, and then it really is tough to do both.
There's many reasons why I'm lucky to be the MP for Tunbridge Wells. Most of all, the people of Tunbridge Wells. But yeah, the fact it's near is also great.
Who knows, actually. And do you think, where do you think your interest in geopolitics came from? Like, how did that play a role in deciding to be an MP?
I think that was travel.
Yeah.
I think, and again, I guess my family, right? When I was 7, that was the first big adventure holiday we went on. We went to Malaysia in 1990. 1990, right? This was long, not Southeast Asia was not like it is now then. And we just rented a car and drove around for 3 weeks.
Wow.
Just stay, each day we'd drive and see where we got to and stay there, and then, and just so interesting. And I think that when you start to do that kind of travel, and I spent, most of my 20s and 30s doing it, and we did a lot of that together, you can't help but be, to notice the differences and to pick apart why things are. And it's a sort of a lifelong fascination that I have with how the world works, which I kind of now couple with my background in defence to try and think, obviously the world's very dangerous at the moment, so I'm trying to, play a role in the conversation about that in the UK.
Yeah. So, becoming an MP, what do you think surprises people most about, the job? Because obviously it can be quite glamorous in some ways, but in other ways it's absolutely grueling, and
Do you know one of the phrases that lots of MPs say to each other is, "Oh, the glamour." And we say that when we've got votes, we've got 8 votes, and it's 11:30 at night, and you're traipsing around the voting lobbies at Parliament thinking, I just want to get home. I'm exhausted. My first meeting's tomorrow at 7 o'clock, and we look at each other and go, "Oh, the glamour." That's not to say there aren't glamorous bits, and the job's a huge privilege, because what you have as an MP, I think if you're a good one, you're really plugged into your constituency, right? So hundreds, thousands of people who run businesses, charities, head teachers, school. You just know all of the people in the constituency, and you get an amazing insight into how not just that community works, but also how it interacts with government. You get a front row seat of how government works. And it's really fascinating. Again, with this, let's come back to this water crisis, right? Because it's kind of front and center in my mind at the moment. The British state works because people have each other's mobile phone numbers. It's when the water went out at the beginning of December in Tunbridge Wells, the chief executive of the council and I were just walking around on our phone, connecting people to solve problems. And as the MP, you're the most connected person, or you should be. You should be the most connected person. And that's absolutely fascinating. And that's a real privilege to be part of and to try and shape that for good, because you can do good as an MP, definitely. Absolutely, in your constituency, you can do good and you can improve people's lives. And that's really cool.
I mean, you're a new MP, only 15, 16 months,
Mm,
but you've been on PMQs asking many questions. You're often on TV and Newsnight and
mm,
things.
mm,
Especially when there's defense related
mm,
kind of queries about Afghanistan, or
mm, mm.
it might be Ukraine actually at the moment as well. How powerful do you think like your writing career, or how influential is your writing career in how you kind of you influence Parliament and
Yeah. So I guess this comes to like, what is an MP, right?
Mm,
And uh, actually, you asked a question earlier I didn't really answer, but you asked, what are people surprised about? MPs don't have a job description.
mm,
We don't have a job contract because we exist because of democratic mandate, right?
yeah.
The only people who can sack me are the electors in Tunbridge Wells.
Hmm.
And, and I have to reapply for my job every 4 or 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And so you have huge range to kind of interpret the job how you like. There are some things that really you should be doing, I mean, just out of kind of a sense of kind of moral purpose, right? Like running constituency surgeries so that vulnerable people can get help and access and you can advocate on their behalf. Like, if you're not doing that, you're not really being an MP. And you need to attend Parliament and make speeches and all the rest of it. But I think that, come back to this connector role. I think that's a really important thing for an MP to do. And the other thing I think that's really important is MPs must communicate, right? They have to be experts in communication.
Mm.
And I think that, so I started out writing books. In fact, the first thing I wrote, the long thing I wrote, was my PhD, right?
Mm.
And then, PhDs can be pretty turgid. And I then edited that PhD and turned it into a book. So it's getting a bit more readable. And then I've written a bunch of other books that each one's got, maybe slightly less intellectual and slightly more readable. And then I started branching out into articles and stuff. And when you're writing a 700-page column, actually, you've got to be really clear at
Yeah.
how you're communicating, because you can make one point in a 700-word column, really, right?
Yeah.
Bit of background, there's the point. And then Twitter, Twitter's been ruined, but Twitter's a brilliant medium, right?
Mm.
Because you have to communicate in really short
Hmm.
sentences, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think using each of these tools over the last, we're now 2025, 12 years, I've refined my communication style so that it's more concise, more accurate. And that's, as an MP, you talk about going on the news, right? Well, if you're doing a radio interview, you might have 5 minutes, so you can do slightly longer answers. If you're doing a clip for the 6 o'clock news, one of the clips is 90. I mean, BBC have it set out, right? It's either 19 seconds
Really.
or it's 9 seconds, right? So there you go. So you get very good at distilling down what's the absolutely essence of my message. And that's what communication is, right? It's
Mm.
about an essence of a message. And it's also about understanding not necessarily how the words come out of you, but how they go into someone else's ears.
Mhm.
That's the key point, right?
Mhm.
And poor communication is not understanding how people are hearing what you're saying and then filling it with loads of extra stuff. That's what poor communication is. And I think, there's 650 MPs. There's a range of communication styles, but we all know, when we look at the TV, we know what a good communicator looks like,
Oh,
right?
for sure.
We just get it. We like, oh yeah, they're very good.
Mm. And the vast majority of MPs aren't on national TV, are they? Being honest, I mean, there are sort of probably 30% that are quite well known, and 70% you wouldn't, probably very rarely on.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's all to do with.
Yeah, and maybe some don't want to go on TV, but I think as an MP, you need to, as I said, know your constituency, love it inside out, right? Advocate for them, be an expert on everything that's going on in your constituency. And at the same time, you should have one subject, right, that speaks to the national conversation, whether it's health, the charity sector, defense, whatever it is.
Mm.
We need all of those things being discussed in the national space.
Mm.
And inevitably, the news agenda will move on to those topics eventually. When those topics come round, they're going to ring you up because you're the
Yeah.
voice in that space. And I I mean, it's for others to judge whether MPs or their MP, right? I mean, if there's any British people in the audience, have a think about your MP. First thing, do you know who your MP is, right? And if you don't know who your MP is, that's quite interesting. Have a Google, have a look at them, and have a look. Are they following that rule? Do they know the constituency? And do they also have one specialist topic that they're, I think that's quite interesting. And I don't think all MPs do that.
No, I totally agree. Campaigning, what does that involve now you're in Parliament? Because obviously there's costs involved in running your office, and you obviously, I imagine, you always got an eye on the future, and you want to be liquid for, your campaign in 2029 or wherever it might start. I suppose you don't always completely know as well, do you, when a campaign might start?
Yeah.
The Labour have a great majority at the moment. You just don't know how this is going to play out.
So it's a if you like, it's a whole other kind of line of operation that you have going on, and you need a non-election year. You need about 100 grand.
I think that would shock most people that you need a sitting MP that would need to raise money. I mean, I don't think the vast majority of people would know that.
So, again, let's come back to, if you look at the current Parliament, there's lots of MPs with very small majorities. And the political situation in the UK at the moment is one where you've got kind of 5 parties that have got 15% or more. And because of the voting system of first past the post, that makes it extremely volatile, because small changes in percentages can have a huge effect on whether seats fall or stay. And so one of the ways that you can nudge that down a little bit, and this isn't going to change in a seismic way whether you hold on to your seat, but you can, at the margins, you can make your seat safer, you can increase your majority. And the way you do that is by communicating, and one of the key ways you communicate is by sending out leaflets, going out canvassing, media, all the things we've spoken about, and that costs money. You might need to have a staff member to coordinate that activity. Your leaflets get delivered by volunteers, but a print run for the whole constituency costs whatever it costs, so on and so forth. And that kind of drumbeat messaging and accessibility to your constituents and messaging about what you're doing is one way that you can perhaps, it's probably 10% at the margins of your vote. And when we've got these wafer thin margins, that's worth doing. So then you come back to, how do you raise your 100 grand? And that, that's a combination of dinners. You'll run stuff in your constituency that does small stuff, and you'll have, a network of donors in London, all of whom I'm very grateful for. A friend of my donors happen to be watching your podcast. I'm sure they are. And it takes up a huge amount of time. It's not the way I design a political system, right? It's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous, and it's time spent that I could be, serving my constituents, right?
Absolutely.
But the reality is, it's just a basic reality of being an MP. And if you want to be a successful MP that stays an MP for a long time because you've got things that you want to do as an MP, then you need to raise money.
Yeah, it's essentially like running a small business. I mean,
it is running. So in Parliament, that's how Parliament actually works. So my parliamentary team, so separate to kind of political stuff and fundraising, I have a parliamentary team, right, who handle my casework, draft my speeches, do research for me, organise my diary, all that kind of stuff. And that is a small business. I employ them myself, right? I get a budget from Parliament and I employ them myself. I also have to rent office space in the constituency. So that is a business. And then separately, I have my local party, which is like another business, right? And that's mostly a volunteer business. You might have one paid member of staff, but and you've got all your lines of operation there, like campaigns, fundraising, whatever. So that's another thing. And then at the national level, you've got your intersection with the national political party and what you're doing with them in terms of shaping the national political debate. So as an MP, you have all these different spheres of things going on, and again, come back to like good MPs are the ones who I think who distill it down to a few key things. A bit like business, right? In business, you need to work out a few key things that you're going to achieve and just focus ruthlessly on those things and shape the wider environment around those things. And if you don't do that, you'll just constantly be firefighting and you'll get swamped.
So your role, obviously, you're going down today to help your constituents, like direct sort of support on the front line.
Yeah.
But then, tomorrow you might be sat on the Defence Select Committee or the Committee of National Security Strategy, discussing Donald Trump and NATO, right?
Yeah.
It's a very different, varied role.
So this week has involved Monday in Parliament questioning ministers on what's going on, whilst on my phone fighting the water crisis in Tunbridge Wells. Tuesday, back to the constituency to get ground truth and to communicate, right? I had to communicate what was going on. So the fact that I was going back there meant we could pull in Sky News, BBC, all the newspapers, and we get on site, on the ground, do a bunch of interviews, as well as kind of finding out actually what's going on. Because one of the problems that we have at the moment is the water company doesn't know what's going on. So the best way to find out is to get there and talk to people. Then last night came back. I went to go and see just before I came back up here, I went to see my 3-month-old baby, give him a kiss, then came back up here last night, was kind of working late on my sofa up here on all the things that I hadn't done during the day because I've been running around in the rain shouting at cameras. And then my phone rings and it's like, okay, there's a Secretary of State visit tomorrow. So I'd planned to be in Parliament today and ask a Prime Minister's question or try and get a Prime Minister's question. Suddenly got to spin it around again, go back that. So after this, we're going to go back down to the constituency. And then tomorrow I am actually on a Defence Committee visit to an MOD establishment where we're going to be briefed on what that establishment does and then have a chance to ask them questions and figure out what's going on. So, and then Friday, back to the constituency. I've got surgery and then kind of constituency visits. So, I mean, you have to have unbelievable reserves of resilience and energy to kind of, and you get to the weekend and you're like, actually, this is a Saturday I'm working, so canvassing on Saturday morning and then constituency visits in the afternoon.
So obviously, as you know, one of my businesses, Morpho's Capital Partners, we're heavily involved in the defence sector.
Yeah.
As you know, you've done some consultancy in the past. With the defence investment plan delayed now, what do you think that message sort of sends to the industry and investors about UK defence strategy? And
yeah, it's terrible. The MOD is a real mess. I mean, it has been forever. But it is a real mess. I mean, the Strategic Defence Review was delayed. And ideally, actually, the Defence Investment Plan and the Strategic Defence Review should have been one document, or the investment plan's an annex to the... Because how can you set out what your strategy is if you haven't kind of costed actually what the elements of that strategy are, right? And actually, we put this to the Chief of Defence Staff on Monday, and he was like, yeah, actually, probably in future they should be together. And then it's delay. And there's this huge gulf in rhetoric between what the government says is the kind of geopolitical risk, which is off the charts at the moment, and what they're willing to put into defence. So I think there's a few problems that come out of it. It's not just that it's delayed. There's also, I'm not sure the government's taking an active enough role to shape the defence market. I'll explain what I mean by that, because it's not just enough to say, here's the money and we want to spend it on ships, planes, drones, whatever, right? I mean, that's necessary, but not sufficient. The problem that we have in the defence sector at the moment is that, whereas previously defence was pretty much all done by primes, so BAE Systems, and you'd be building these exquisite warships and nuclear subs and long lead times and all the rest of it, right? Big equipment programs. But warfare has shifted. We still need that, but we also need almost a separate procurement system that's much more agile. So drones in Ukraine are from concept to deployment are being turned around in 6 weeks, right?
Mhm.
Come up with a concept, you 3D print it, you bolt on some other stuff, or you take an old model and you re-upgrade the software and put on another electronic warfare suite, and then you get it out, and it's spinning like this, right? Because it's the Russians are coming up with something that's defeating your drones, and the Ukrainians have got to spin up something else, and so on. So that huge agility in the procurement cycle,
Yeah.
and the only way the MOD has been able to do this is by setting up a completely separate procurement organization called Operation Kindred.
Mm.
And there's no way that they just simply couldn't do it inside the old procurement cycles. So that's the kind of challenge of how you make that permanent, right?
Mhm.
And not just for Ukraine, we need to do that for ourselves, right? We need to be able to do longer term building battleships and much shorter turnaround, in weeks rather than years or decades.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of challenge. And then in terms of shaping the markets, which I mentioned to you, at the moment, because these are big primes, they've got access to capital markets. Many of them are publicly listed.
Mm.
But these SMEs are tiny.
Yeah.
They're just a couple of guys with a brilliant idea, and maybe they've got a bit of space in an industrial estate somewhere. They're tiny.
Exactly.
And they can't, to bring that product to market, to prototype and whatever, they can't deal with a system that changes its mind. And whereas a prime can change its mind, charge an extra 10%, and they're happy. But the small firms can't do that. They need something much more secure that they can understand. It's cash flow, right? Cash is
Yeah,
king,
of course.
right? And so their cash flow's done. And then the other problem is, how do those companies, small and medium, access capital? And whether that's VC or early stage or whatever, that wraparound is not. I know. I think one of the ways that the government could shape that is by giving greater consistency and perhaps sovereign guarantees for some of that capital, which would enable it to flow into that sector. Because if we don't get that bit right, all we're going to end up with is defence inflation. The
Yeah.
government will spend more money, the same amount of kit will come out at the end. It will just cost more.
Mm.
If you've got more money than you got stuff, you get inflation. And that, if we don't get that capital allocation, that sovereign guarantee, that access to capital for small businesses right, then we're just going to end up with inflation. And I feel that the government, it's not about the government getting out of the way. This is where the government has to shape the market
Mhm.
and provide guarantees and structure to enable those firms to thrive. And it's not doing that at the moment.
So, like, we have things like the British Business Bank that support thousands of businesses in the UK. They're in one of the funds that I'm in called Red Rice. They help us, they helped us a lot with a big equity injection at the beginning. But you wouldn't see the British Business Bank probably typically wanting to fund the defence sector.
It's ESG, right?
Yeah.
This is the other thing is that, and this is changing slowly, but the appetite for money in the city to go into defence, because it's sort of seen as slightly distasteful. And my argument to those defence firms would be, those capital firms, the VCs or whatever, is firstly, you can make a lot of money in defence. But secondly, if you don't stop a war, the reason we're rearming at the moment is because we want to stop a war, not because we want to fight a war, right?
Mhm.
You stop wars by deterring, by having a strong military. And if we do end up in a war, your other investments are going to tank, right? So actually, by building up the defence sector, not only can you make money, it will probably deter a war, and in so doing, that will probably help your other investments. Because if we end up in a war, it screws economies. War, you have massive inflation. It's a disaster for economies. So that's my sort of broad message to people thinking about whether they should get involved in finance in the defence sector.
I mean, the US model is to spend $1 trillion a year. I think probably the UK spend 50 or 60 billion, right? And
pound.
and our population is a quarter of theirs. So they're spending a huge amount more than us and always have. And it's all about the economy to them, isn't it?
Yeah, so that the model in the US is the jam will be spread across all the states. So Dakota will have, I'm just making it up, but Dakota will have a missile factory, and Ohio will make armored vehicles and whatever, right? And what that does is it means that in Congress, in both houses, Senate, House of Representatives, there's always a champion for that particular equipment program,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And they are, consistently lobbying for that capability in the envelope. Now, I think that the US, that $1 trillion is, you know, there's a huge amount of duplication,
Mm.
waste. I mean, it's great. I mean, it has to be seen to be believed to
Mm.
go to war with the US military, which I did. I mean, you step off the RAF plane in Kandahar, and it's like, we've got 6 of these planes or whatever. And you sort of look out across the airfield, and as far as the eye can see, there's American like tankers, Black Hawks, Apache, just literally you can't see the end of it. And this is just one bit of their military, right?
Yeah.
Like on one airfield, there's more airframes than the entire British military's got. I mean, it just has to be seen to be believed. And there's a huge amount of duplication and waste in that. Of course there is. And part of that is because of the pork barreled thing that I've just spoken about, where every district's got its kind of
Yeah.
missile factory or whatever. But defense spending can drive GDP,
Mm.
particularly actually, yes, the manufacturing is useful because, a prime will have 1,000 SMEs in the supply chain. So that's great. But actually our defense R&D spending is where you get the real multiplier. Because of the spin-offs. So you do the R&D, you come up with a great concept, and then that also gets spun off into these other things that are good for society and make money. So there is money to be made, and there is societal benefit to be gained from it.
For sure. So what technology would you say, worries you the most? Like, what keeps you up at night, from a defense perspective, but also like a parent.
So what keeps me up at night the most is the collapse of NATO.
Mm-hmm.
We have a situation where Russia is testing NATO, and the Article 5 guarantee, if NATO's bluff gets called on that and they can't respond, then we're in deep trouble. So that's what keeps me up at night in that kind of geopolitical sense. Um, as a parent, the thing I kind of worry about the most, I think, is, I mean, my kids are like 3 and 3 months, right? So, but it's really interesting what I see with my daughter, who's 3, is I see her response to a phone.
Mm-hmm.
We might take a photo and she goes, "Can I see the photo?" And we go, "Yeah, sure, here you go." And she's utterly, it's like crack,
Oh, absolutely.
right? They're utterly at that age. And I really worry about later on school, social media, all that kind of stuff. I just think that we haven't got to grips with that yet,
Mm.
how we deal with that as a society. And most of the schools in my constituency ban phones in schools,
Yeah.
which is good. I do think there's more that we can do there. I think we need to think about how we protect young people from online stuff and social media. So that's probably my biggest sort of one.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. My daughter turned 17 today, and she's probably had a phone for 8 or 9 years now. And I think if her mum and I had our time again, we probably would have delayed that significantly. I think our generation has made a big mistake with it. I think
I agree.
giving a supercomputer to a child.
Yeah.
We know how addictive they are for adults. I mean, I find mine extremely addictive.
Yeah.
You do as well.
Yeah.
It's, I think we've talked about this, how we have to turn them off and put them in the drawer sometimes.
Yeah.
When we're on holiday or
Yeah.
Sunday.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you do not have family time. I leave mine in my house when I go out for dinner.
Yeah.
And just walk to dinner and think, well,
Yeah.
this is a nuclear war.
And
I'm gonna be
actually,
okay.
yeah. And it's it's actually so nice. I think we see with kids, the teenagers, that they're less happy when they're with their phones.
Yeah.
And then you take them off them, and we get this as well, like that. When I go on, like, put it in a drawer, and you have a week, and at the end, and it takes a couple of days. The first couple of days, you're like, "Where's my phone?" And
Absolutely.
then it goes, and then you're like, "Oh, I feel so free and relaxed."
Yeah, no, I totally agree. How do you think AI is gonna replace graduate jobs? Because I think this phone, issue is all technology related. We see like the latest iPhones can do things that, in ChatGPT 5, whatever it is, 5.2, it's just an incredible now piece of software. What do you think the biggest threat is for grads? Do you think we're going to see huge reductions in grad jobs, or do you think it will just be a bit more of a refined kind of job role where they're more efficient?
I don't know is the kind of honest answer, and I'm a member of that all-party parliamentary group on AI, and that's
Mm.
quite interesting when you have discussions there with experts that there's a huge variety of opinions. Like people don't really know. So anyone who tells you anything like certain about AI,
Yeah.
zooming out and thinking about technological change and how humans interact with technology, it will bring huge changes. But what will happen in the longer term is that many jobs will disappear, but new ones that we can't even think of will be created. So I don't know, we have app developers now, right? But 20 years ago, if I said, you'd be like, what's that?
Yeah.
So, and influencers and whatever, we have so many new things. I think there's a problem that if lower level stuff can be done by AI, then how do you train people to do the high level stuff? And that's a huge problem. I know that some firms are deliberately training their grads, even though they probably could get AI to take some of that work off, because at least for a period to help them learn so that they can then progress faster up the rung. And it's at the moment, as you know, there's a kind of oversupply of graduates. Like it's hard to get a graduate job at the moment. There's kind of quite high youth unemployment, and I don't think it's been shown conclusively that is caused by AI. I think there's a lot of wait and see at the moment. My sense in the business, when I speak to business people in the business world, is particularly in the UK, there's kind of uncertainty about the Labour government's programme. They've kind of messed up the economy. All the kind of NI stuff is crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's absolutely slams. This is hospitality and this high streets and business rates and all it does. They don't really know what they're doing. And I think that's created quite a lot of wait and see. With all these double whammies, employment rights and stuff, and that coupled with AI, Donald Trump, geopolitics, people are like, do you know what? I'm going to take quite a conservative approach to my business. I'm going to build some fat into it. I'm going to try and actually that risk that I might have taken when the economy was growing at 2%, I'm not going to take that now. And that is, I don't know what you think, but that's the sort of the things that I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I've got two really great grads, and we've been probably been at companies for about 8 or 9 months now, since the beginning of last summer. And I suppose, although they're both very proficient on AI, I think what I've encouraged them both more than anything is to build their networks. Got to network more than ever now. And if you haven't got a good network going forward, you're going to struggle. Because most of the core skills that we used to need, we won't need. They'll just be a click of a button. When you're walking down the steps of the tube, you can create a presentation. To take someone 6 weeks. And so their contacts, their network, their personal skills are more important than ever.
I think that's right.
And that's the way of the world, isn't it? And that's how you and I operate. And what makes us.
You're a great connector. You've always been a great connector, which is interesting. Even I wouldn't have known what that was age 12. But thinking back, like you've always been really good at kind of, and then doing that thing where you think, I've got this problem in front of me. If I get that person and that person together and bring them together to sort this problem out, that's a kind of unique contribution that I can make in connecting those people that help solve that problem. So I agree with you. You're glad to listen to you.
So on a personal note, do you have like a favorite personal mantra?
So I always say, it's so much so that my wife takes the piss out of me, it can't be beyond the wit of man.
Right. Yeah.
Like it can't, like whatever problem we're facing, I'm just like, it can't be that difficult to solve this problem. Like, let's just do it. It's like, or or kind of, let's get this done yesterday. I don't say that, but like that sentiment of like, let's just do this. Like, because most of the time I find with people, like the biggest blocks are the ones in their own mind.
Absolutely.
They're sort of, I shouldn't do that because of this reason or that person, or what's that person going to think, or just do it.
Yeah, no, and not caring, as you're sort of famous for, not caring too much about what people think about you are. Right, but that's a big thing that people have to overcome, isn't it? Especially when you're in the public eye.
Sure.
If you do, then you're stuffed from day one, aren't you?
Yeah, and I guess one thing I've learnt over, we're in our 40s now, right? So over the last sort of 20 years is, yes, famously, I've never cared what people think of me. Um, what's got better, much better, I hope, now that I'm a politician, is I have much better instincts for when I need to present a certain version of myself
Yeah,
and when I
very
need
good.
to not, you know?
No, absolutely. No, good. Well, that's a good way to finish. Thanks so much for coming on the pod, and really good to hear about what you're up to, and onwards we go, right?
Thank you,
2024.
mate.